The cake had already been cut by the time I pulled into the gravel lot behind St. Andrew's Fellowship Hall. I sat in the car for a long moment, engine ticking as it cooled, watching the warm light spill through the tall windows onto the frost-hardened ground. November in Clarksville. The kind of cold that doesn't apologize. I checked the time on my phone. 7:43. I was late, and I knew it. And some part of me had done that on purpose, arrived after the dinner, after the toasts, after the part where my mother would have positioned herself near the door to intercept me before I could walk in. My brother Marcus was getting married in that building. My brother Marcus, who had called me 3 weeks ago and asked me, in the careful, quiet voice he used when he wanted something uncomfortable, if I could maybe not wear the uniform. "It's just Claire's family is pretty traditional," he'd said. "Her uncle already made some comments about the military, and I just don't want the night to be about that." I hadn't said anything for a moment. "Becca?" he'd asked. "I heard you. You're not mad, are you?" I thought about everything I wanted to say. I thought about the 7 deployments. I thought about the 2 years I'd spent in places Marcus had never heard of, doing things I would never fully explain to anyone in that fellowship hall. I thought about the money I'd sent home when the hardware store had a bad year, and the year after that, and the year after that. I thought about my mother's voice at my commissioning ceremony, whispering to my aunt that she didn't understand why Rebecca couldn't just find a nice job closer to home. "I'm not mad," I said. "I'll see you at the rehearsal dinner." But I hadn't gone to the rehearsal dinner. And now I was sitting in the gravel lot in my full dress uniform, the silver eagle of a colonel gleaming on my shoulder, watching my breath fog the windshield. I hadn't planned to wear it. I want to be clear about that. I had packed a navy blue dress in my garment bag, something appropriate and forgettable. Something that said I belong here among the centerpieces and the taper candles and the extended family from Chattanooga. It was hanging in the closet of my hotel room 11 miles down the road. I had put it on. I had looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. Then I'd taken it off. I reached into the back seat and retrieved my cover, the service cap I hadn't worn to a social event in longer than I could remember, and I put it on. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror. Every ribbon was where it belonged. Every brass button was centered and bright. I got out of the car. The cold hit me immediately. That particular Tennessee cold that carries the smell of wood smoke and dead leaves. I walked across the gravel slowly, not rushing, the way my first drill sergeant had taught me to walk into any room I had earned the right to enter. I opened the door. The sound came first, the low murmur of 100 conversations layered over soft string music, the clinking of glasses, the laughter of children who had long since given up on staying at the children's table. The fellowship hall had been transformed with white tulle and pine greenery and small votives in hurricane glasses. It was genuinely beautiful. Claire had good taste. I was halfway to the coat room when I heard the first chair. It scraped back hard against the hardwood floor. Then another. Then 3 at once. By the time I understood what was happening, 8 men were already on their feet at the long table near the back wall, the table I hadn't even noticed on my way in. The table where Marcus's college friends had been seated, several of whom I now recognized as veterans he'd known through the VFW post. One of them, a tall man I remembered from Fort Campbell who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, brought his hand up to his brow in a salute that was sharp enough to cut glass. "Colonel on deck," he said. Not loudly, just clearly, and then the others followed. I am not a person who cries easily. I have stood at the graves of men and women I served beside and held myself together with something that felt less like strength than like the simple refusal to let grief have the room. But something moved through me in that moment that I did not have a name for, something warm and complicated and 20 years old. I brought my hand to my brow and returned the salute. The room had gone quiet in that particular way. Rooms go quiet when something unexpected has happened, and no one is yet sure whether it is wonderful or terrible. I lowered my hand. I scanned the faces. My father was standing near the dessert table with a fork halfway to his mouth, suspended, staring at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, not the familiar, mild disappointment, not the cheerful deflection, but something that looked almost like recognition. My mother had her hand over her mouth. Claire's family at the head tables had turned in their chairs. Marcus, standing near the cake with his new wife's hand in his, was looking at me with wide eyes I couldn't quite read. And my aunt, my mother's sister, the one who had once told me at Christmas dinner that my uniform made her uncomfortable because it reminded her of all the fighting, my aunt was very still. I walked to find my seat. Let me tell you something about growing up in the Hollis family of Clarksville, Tennessee. My father built Hollis Hardware from a rental space on Commerce Street into the kind of store where people brought their kids on Saturday mornings just to wander the aisles and ask questions and feel the particular comfort of being somewhere that knew what it was. He was good at the work and he was proud of the work, and he had quiet, steady expectations that his children would be good at some version of the same kind of thing. Solid, local, rooted. Marcus was rooted. Marcus had played high school baseball, studied business at Austin Peay, come back to Clarksville, and eventually worked his way into a management position at the plant outside of town. He bought a house 4 miles from my parents. He called on Sundays. He was, in every way my family understood the word, a success. I left. I left when I was 18, the summer after my senior year, on a morning in July that was already 90 degrees before 9 o'clock. I had taken the ASVAB in the spring, and my recruiter, a staff sergeant named Delgado who had the patience of a very old tree, had spent 4 months answering every question I could think of. I had wanted the Army since I was 12 years old and read a book about women in combat support roles that my school librarian had ordered for me special. I had never wanted anything else with the same absolute certainty. My mother had cried, not the proud kind. "You could go to college," she said. "You could stay here. You could do something that doesn't." She stopped. She didn't have the word for what she didn't want me to do. My father had been quieter about it. He shook my hand at the door of the recruiter's office and said, "Write when you can." It was not nothing, but it was not the thing I had wanted, which was for him to tell me he understood. Marcus had joked that I'd be back in a semester. He meant it kindly, I think. He had simply never considered that I might be serious. I was serious. I went through basic at Fort Jackson in the full weight of a South Carolina August, and I did not come home in a semester. I went to AIT. I got my first duty station. I did the work with everything I had, and the work recognized me in the way work does when you give it everything. It gave me back more than I put in. I made sergeant in 2 years. I applied for officer candidate school and was selected. I was commissioned a second lieutenant in a ceremony that my parents attended but did not fully understand, with a look on their faces like someone watching a foreign film without subtitles, following the emotional shape of it without quite grasping the content. I called home regularly. I sent cards. I came back for Christmas when I could, which was less often than anyone wanted. My mother and I had a recurring conversation that was really the same conversation every time, conducted in different clothes, in which she asked when I was going to settle down, and I gave an answer that satisfied neither of us. My father talked about the hardware store. Marcus talked about baseball, and then about Claire, and then about the wedding. And I tried to be present for all of it across the distance that had grown between us, not the miles, but the other thing. The distance that comes from living an entirely different life than the people who love you. The thing that nobody in my family ever said out loud, but that I felt in every room I walked into when I came home, was that they didn't know how to be proud of me. They could see that I had done something. They just couldn't figure out what to do with the feeling. I sat down at my assigned seat, table 7, next to a cousin I hadn't seen in 6 years, and a couple from Claire's side who introduced themselves as the Hendersons from Knoxville. And I placed my cover in my lap, and I accepted a glass of water, and I tried to be easy about it. Around me, conversation gradually resumed. The string music started again. A child knocked over a cup of apple juice at the kids' table and was immediately forgiven. Marcus came to me 10 minutes later. He came alone, without Claire, which I appreciated. He pulled out the empty chair beside me and sat down and put his elbows on the table and looked at me for a moment without speaking. He had my father's jawline and my mother's eyes, and he was wearing a suit that fit him well, and he looked happy in the deep structural way that people look happy when they have finally arrived somewhere they were always meant to be. "You wore it," he said. "I wore it." He nodded slowly. I waited for the rest of it, the complaint, the quiet reproach, the reminder about Claire's uncle. Instead, he said, "Those guys at table 12, the ones who stood up." He paused. "You know most of them served, right? A couple of them were at Fort Campbell same time as you. I recognized a few faces. They've been asking about you all night, before you got here. Asking if it was true that Marcus Hollis's sister was a colonel." He looked at the tablecloth. I told them yes. I said yes, my sister is a colonel. The way he said it quietly, like he was telling me something he had only just figured out made something ease in my chest that I hadn't known was tight. "Marcus," I started. "I should have said that on the phone," he said. "When I called you about the uniform, I should have said, I don't know. Something different." He looked up. "Claire's uncle can have his opinions. I shouldn't have made them your problem." I looked at my brother, this person I had grown up beside, who had always been easier to love than to talk to, and I thought about how much of our lives had been spent talking around the things that mattered. "Thank you," I said. "I'm glad you wore it," he said. "It looks right on you." He went back to his bride. I watched him go, and then I sat quietly for a moment and let myself feel the particular, complicated texture of that, the thing that had been a wound for so long that I'd stopped calling it by its name. My mother found me near the end of the night, by the coat rack, when I was getting ready to leave. She was not a small woman, but she looked somehow smaller than usual in the dim light of the hallway, smaller and more tired, and her lipstick had worn off, and she was holding her handbag with both hands the way she did when she was working up to something. "Rebecca," she said. "Mom." She looked at the uniform. She had looked at it several times throughout the evening, I had noticed, even when I was pretending not to. A long, careful look, like she was reading something she hadn't expected to find. "Those men," she said. "When you walked in, they all stood up." "Yes." She was quiet. Outside, through the heavy door, I could hear cars starting in the parking lot, the distant laughter of departing guests. "Your father wants to know," she said, very carefully, "if you'd come to the house tomorrow, before you drive back. He said he wants to hear about your work, what you actually do." She paused. I know we haven't asked in the way we should have." I stood there in the dim hallway of St. Andrew's Fellowship Hall in Clarksville, Tennessee, in the uniform I had earned over 22 years of my life, and I thought about all the times I had driven back to my hotel at the end of a visit home with the specific loneliness of someone who had been in the same room as the people they love and still felt far away. "I can do that," I said. She reached out and briefly, carefully, touched the silver eagle on my shoulder. Her expression was something I did not have a name for. Then she dropped her hand and looked at me directly. "You know I didn't understand," she said. "What you were doing, what it meant. I still don't understand all of it." She pressed her lips together. "But I should have tried harder to learn." It was not a grand speech. It was not the kind of thing that gets said in movies, with swelling music and a well-lit close-up. It was a woman in a blue dress in a coat hallway, tired after her son's wedding, telling the truth about something she had gotten wrong for a long time. It was enough. "I know, Mom," I said. "I know you didn't. We'll figure it out." She nodded. She smoothed her jacket. She pushed open the door to the parking lot and the cold came rushing in, and she looked back once before she stepped out into it, a look that was some mixture of pride and grief, and the particular love of parents who have watched their children become strangers and are only now beginning to understand that the stranger is still the child. I drove back to my hotel on Route 41 with the windows cracked and the heater running and the radio off. The fields on either side of the road were silver and still in the moonlight. I thought about a girl who had sat in a school library in this same county, in this same flat Tennessee light, and read about women who had gone somewhere, done something, carried something forward that needed carrying. I thought about every iteration of myself between that girl and this car, the raw recruit sweating through August in South Carolina, the young lieutenant learning to lead people twice her age, the captain and the major and the lieutenant colonel, the years of work that had no witnesses except the work itself and the people who had done it alongside me. I thought about the men at table 12, standing. I thought about my brother's face. The next morning I drove to my parents' house in the cold, clear November light. My father was at the kitchen table with coffee and a legal pad, and he had written a list of questions. He had actually written them down on paper. This man who had never once asked me about my work in 22 years, and the list had 11 items on it, and the handwriting was careful and deliberate in the way his handwriting always was, the handwriting of a man who built things and respected precision. The first question was, what does a colonel actually do? I sat down across from him and I poured myself a cup of coffee, and I started at the top of the list. We talked for 3 hours. My mother came and went, refilling the coffee, occasionally pulling up a chair and listening with her chin in her hand and asking her own questions, smaller questions, questions about people. Were my soldiers young? Did they have families? Did I worry about them? How did I know what to do when something went wrong? My father's questions were structural and practical, about command authority, about logistics, about how decisions moved up and down a chain of accountability. And I could see him fitting the pieces together the way he fit pieces together when he was diagnosing a problem at the store, with the focused patience of someone who genuinely wanted to understand how a complicated system worked. At one point, he picked up his pen and wrote something on the legal pad and underlined it. I craned my neck slightly to see what it was. He had written, "Ask Marcus about VFW post, get more involved." I looked up at him. He saw me reading it and didn't say anything, just folded the top of the page over. "Marcus volunteers with a home repair program for veterans," I said. "He started a few months ago." My father looked at me. "I didn't know that." "He didn't mention it?" He shook his head slowly. "He's a good kid," he said, in the voice fathers use when they are realizing something about their children that they should have said aloud a long time ago. "He is," I said. Before I left, my father walked me to my car. We stood for a moment in the driveway in the cold, hands in our pockets, looking at the bare sycamore at the edge of the yard that had been there since before I was born. He had never been a man of many words. He was not going to become one now. "I want you to know," he said finally, "that I am proud of you. I think I have been for a long time." A pause. I just didn't know how to say it in a way that meant anything. 22 years. 22 years of coming home and leaving again, of driving away on Sunday afternoons with the window cracked and the particular silence of things unsaid. And there it was, finally, standing in a driveway in November, as plain and sturdy as a 2x4. "It means something," I said. "Saying it now." He nodded. He shook my hand the way he had shaken it in the recruiter's parking lot when I was 18, that same firm grip, that same slight formality, which I understood now as his version of tenderness. I drove back toward Fort Campbell on the interstate, with the Tennessee countryside opening up on either side, the low brown hills and the bare tree lines and the sky that gray-white color it gets in late autumn, wide and even and patient. I thought about the fellowship hall and table 12 and my brother's face and my mother's hand on my shoulder and my father's list of 11 questions written on a legal pad at the kitchen table. I thought about what it costs to choose a life that the people who love you don't understand. I thought about what it costs them not to try. I thought about how long those two things can sit on opposite sides of a table before someone figures out how to pass the coffee. I had not gone to that wedding looking for anything. I had not walked through that door with a plan or a speech or a message to send. I had walked through that door in the uniform I had earned because it was mine, because it represented the sum of everything I had chosen and everything I had survived and everything I was still becoming, and because I had reached the age and the rank and the particular tiredness of someone who was done apologizing for who she was. The men at table 12 had stood because they recognized something. Not the rank, exactly, though they respected it. Not the uniform, though they honored it. They stood because they understood what it meant to have given a long portion of your life to something larger than yourself, and to walk into a room carrying that weight quietly, without announcement, without asking anyone to see it. They saw it. And sometimes that is all you need. The fields opened wider on either side of the road, and the sky brightened slightly toward the west where the sun was already dropping, and I turned on the radio and found a station playing something country and old that my father used to play on Sunday mornings while he made eggs, and I let the miles come. I had a report due Monday, a briefing Wednesday, a young captain on my staff who was struggling with something she didn't yet have the language for and needed someone to sit across from her and help her find it. There was always work. There was always the next thing, the next mission, the next person who needed something I might have to give. But for now, there was just the road and the sky and the particular piece of someone who has put down a thing she has been carrying for a long time and can feel, in the new lightness of her hands, exactly how heavy it was. I drove north. The sycamores along the highway caught the last flat light of the afternoon and held it, pale and silver, all the way to the horizon.